All right, my friends, let's crank up the time machine and salute the raw, unfiltered glory of life on the road. The sights, the sounds, and smells of a touring rock band. Yeah. Forget the polished documentaries. Forget the glossy magazine spreads. I'm talking about the real deal, the backstage grit, the van life chaos, the little details that told you exactly where you were and who you were with. The sights, man, they were unforgettable. Setlists taped to beer-soaked stages, neon signs buzzing outside half-empty clubs, guitar cases stacked higher than your patience, bandmates sprawled out like corpses in a van after a 6-hour drive, a roadie asleep on a pile of merch boxes. Those were the postcards of the road, snapshots burned into your memory. The sounds, that was the true soundtrack. The drummer tapping on his knees, the buzz of an amp warming up, the squeal of feedback that felt like a war cry, snores from the back seat mixed with late night radio static, crowds screaming one night, crickets chirping the next. It wasn't just music. It was noise, chaos, and beauty all mashed together. And the smells, oh yeah, those were part of the package. Stale beer-soaked carpets in dive bars, the sharp tang of sweat baked into your clothes, the funky stew of fast food bags fermenting in the van. Add in the sweet burn of overcooked amp tubes and the occasional whiff of roadkill on a back highway, and you had yourself the real perfume of rock and roll. This is the salute, the retro postcard to the sights, sounds, and smells that defined life on the road. It wasn't pretty, but it was real. It was messy, loud, stinky, and absolutely unforgettable. Because when you look back, you don't just remember the shows, you remember the ride. And that, my friends, is the spirit of touring rock and roll. Now look, man, it's not easy being in a band, traveling in vans, playing bars. And look, man, the pay is next to nothing. It's not fun traveling in a van. It's not easy. And look, if you're at that level, you're definitely going to be sharing rooms. It might be 4 people in a room. And look, man, I personally don't like sharing beds with dudes. So, look, I've always been a guy that's more comfortable sleeping on the floor than having some snoring dude sleeping next to me. So look, man, I always am able to find a place to sleep. I've always been grounded like that. Ever since I was a little kid, I never had a problem. Give me a towel, give me a blanket, give me a pillow, and give me a nice corner in the room. I can sleep anywhere. And I can remember one time being in New Orleans and sleeping on the floor. And the maid would come in to clean the room, and they said to the other bandmates, "Who's that boy that be sleeping on the floor like a vampire, sleeping all day? Who is that?" And they said, "Oh, that's just our guitar player." That would be me, camped out on the floor, sleeping off the night before. The reality is, man, I don't care. I didn't care if I was sleeping on the floor as long as I was out there doing it. That's all that mattered. And now I can look back and laugh at those times and the moments shared with bandmates. And look, man, I just thought about it today. If you were out in a van and touring with your friends like that, and maybe you went your separate ways after the band broke up or the gigs stopped rolling in. You know what? Reach out to that person today and say, hey, man, I know that was rough, but man, we'll always have those memories, because the memories of being out there doing it, that is the most important thing you can have. There are no Billboard charts for guys, traveling in a van. Now, many times guys can take the van life and graduate and end up in a tour bus. I've seen guys that were traveling all in a van, humping their own gear, driving from gig to gig, toughing it out. And all of a sudden, boom, they take off, they get a record deal, they're on the radio, and boom, they're bigger than you are. So look, it can and does happen. So if you happen to be in a tour bus, never look down on those guys that are opening for you in that van, because those guys could one day be the next superstars. Man, van life ain't easy. And look, it takes a young man to be able to survive that lifestyle. I don't recommend guys in their 50s and 60s traveling that way, certainly if it's for low dough. But man, you know what? Having those memories, and I know that there's plenty of guys still out there doing it. Look, and if you're out there still doing it and traveling in a van, you get my salute, because I know it's not easy, but you know what it is? It's very real. The sights. Touring looked less like MTV Cribs and more like Motel 6 with a broken ice machine. Now look, man, Motel 6 sometimes is the higher end of van life touring hotel rooms. And I've talked about on this channel one time playing a gig, and the band leader comes up and goes, hey, you guys might want to hook up with some chicks because we don't have a hotel room tonight. So if you can find a place to stay, literally pawning us off on whatever local we can pawn ourselves off on. Or here's the deal. Sometimes hotels that make a Motel 6 seem like a Marriott. That is the reality of the road. And then there's those times when there is no hotel room, or there's no hotel within a 2-hour radius of this crazy, whacked out festival that you're playing in the middle of nowhere. That is the reality, my friends. Set list, duct taped to beer-soaked floors were your billboards of glory, right? And I used to oftentimes walk into a venue. I would be the first one up in the morning, and the door would open, the back door to the club, and I'd see it pried open with a brick in the door. And I'd walk in and I'd survey the damage of the club the night before. Many times these clubs are not clean when you get there in the morning. They're completely destroyed from the night before, and you're wondering, do they even know that we're coming, right? And I get back to the van, or I get back to the tour bus, and everybody goes, how is it? And I go, smells like beer and regret. That, my friends, is the reality 9 times out of 10. Very rarely do you walk into a club, early in the morning or even midday afternoon, and you go in and goes, wow, this place is really nice. I can count on one hand the times that has happened. Sleeping bandmates piled in a van looked like a crime scene the cops gave up on. Look, if you don't have a hotel room and you're not in a fancy tour bus, then there is no bunk and you're just going to have to try to sleep wherever you can. And depending on how many people are jammed into that van, or if there are even seats, you'll have band members laying on top of the 412 cabs. You'll have band members crashed out on, road cabs. You'll have, all kinds of people just hanging all over the place, desperately trying to sleep. That, my friends, is the sight of the road. Now the sounds, feedback, that wasn't a problem. It was a love language. And every van squeak was basically your tour manager whispering, "We might not make it." I would say most of the time, if you're touring in a van, you don't have a tour manager. It's every man for himself. And that means this, man, you might have to get up in the middle of the night and change a tire. You might run out of gas at 4 a.m. as the sun is coming up. And the rest of the guys might be so passed out from the night before that it's your responsibility to get out there, get some gas so you can get to the next gig and make a few bucks to keep going. The drummer tapping on the way to the gig, that was the Morse code of the damned. The smells of the road, van funk, equal parts Taco Bell, socks, and broken dreams. Dive bars always smelled like beer, bleach, and bad decisions, or as I like to call it, beer and regret. Burnt amp tubes gave off the sweetest cologne you'd ever wear, and sometimes those smells are better than the perfume, shall we say, of the local inhabitants. So here's the truth, my brothers and sisters. The touring life was never about the glamour. It was about the sights, sounds, and smells that told you exactly where you were in the universe. Every duct-taped set list was proof you were alive. Every flickering neon sign outside a club was a reminder that for one night you mattered to somebody. Every van full of half-dead bandmates was a rolling monument to sacrifice. Those sights weren't pretty, but they were pure. The sounds, they were your battle hymns. The hum of amps, the squeal of feedback, the rattle of gear in the back of a van. You carried that soundtrack in your bones. You knew the feeling of silence after a crowd roared, and you knew the sound of your own doubts trying to drown you out. That noise, that glorious noise, was what made you. And the smells, yeah, they were nasty, but they were yours. That blend of sweat, beer, and van funk clung to your clothes and never quite washed out. It was the cologne of rock and roll, the stench of miles traveled and dues paid. It told the world, we were here, we lived this, we earned every single note. And that's the spit and spirit of rock and roll. Not perfection, not polish, not sanitized arenas. It's the raw, messy, smelly, noisy chaos of being out there night after night, chasing the next stage, the next song, the next memory. That's the real perfume, the real postcard, the real soundtrack of life in a band. So raise a glass, dudes, not to the fantasy, but to the reality, to the duct tape, the feedback, and yes, the funk. Because that's where the magic lived. And no matter how clean or digital the future gets, rock and roll will always smell like sweat, sound like chaos, and look like a van parked under a flickering street light at 3 a.m. That's the truth. That's the spirit. And that, my friends, is forever.